Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This afternoon I'm going to be doing another movie review, so hopefully you find this one interesting. This movie is a horror film from France, English language, released in the year 2017, directed by Mathieu Turi, and this film is called Hostile. So Hostile is set in the future. You've got humanity that's been decimated by this horrible virus. Most of humanity has been wiped out, but there's a handful of survivors. So these survivors actually try to live out day by day, but it's a very difficult task. And on this particular day, they've sent out this woman. Now this woman's job is to patrol the barren landscapes and try and find anything salvageable that will be a benefit of the base. So this woman is going through, she's collecting things from these diners, these deserted diners. You've got dead bodies everywhere, so it's a very morbid atmosphere, but this is the harsh reality of the new life that these people are facing. And this woman, she collects a few things and she's coming home, and then unfortunately she has an accident that leaves her stranded in the middle of nowhere. So when nightfall approaches, we learn that there are horrible creatures that are basically lurking about, and they prey upon human beings. And so this woman, she's trapped in the car, she's desperately trying to get onto the radio to let them know where she is, but she can't do it, so she has to fight off the impending physical danger. But also we learn that there's a lot of trauma in her life, where it's a psychological battle as well. So whether or not she can make it out in one piece is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Hostile. Expectations coming into this film, I wasn't overly excited. Now yes, this is a French horror film, but French English language films aren't quite as memorable as the French language movies, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's directed at a different culture, directed at a different audience, but they just don't seem to have the same impact. And so for that reason, I really wasn't expecting much coming into Hostile, and I just saw the trailer and I thought this is a typical post-apocalyptic film. But after seeing the movie, I will say it's not a brilliant film. There are glaring problems that does prevent the movie from working and being as impactful as it really wants to be, but I will say that it is a disposable horror film. It's a horror film that I would recommend for at least one viewing, because it does have its moments. I thought that some of the set pieces and the horror moments were actually quite effective, but I just think it's a little bit too simplistic for its own good, which is something I'll go into a little bit later. But what I liked about the film is visually, it is very arresting. Visually, it does tell you the story of decimation, of basically devastation of humanity, and when humanity has collapsed, nature will take over. And so I thought that was it's just a sheer level of hopelessness that Mathieu Turi has managed to create to give you that post-apocalyptic feeling. And so the colours are very vibrant, but the colours are very dehydrating. It feels as though it's basically you need to have a drink afterwards, because you're actually going through all the pain and torment that these characters are going through. And so I thought, as far as the setup is concerned, it looked very good, and that's exactly what you want from a post-apocalyptic film. You want to know, you want to feel the danger, you want to feel the hopelessness and just the desolation, and I think it does a very good job at setting that platform. You've also got some very good sound effects. Now the movie does play strongly on sound effects, because the majority of the film is taking place at night time inside this car, and so it's a very limited setting, but I think they use that setting fairly well, because when you actually hear the noises in the darkness, it does play on your imagination, it does make you panic, and so the suspense is actually created through basically the sound effects within things that you can't see. And so I thought that was fairly decent, and the movie does play some pretty good horror set pieces when these monsters come about, and so there's a little bit more to these monsters than you'd first think, and so that gives the movie a little bit more depth, and it does elevate it past just a movie just there for visual base. This movie is fairly gory, it's fairly brutal in parts, but it's used very sparingly. So the driving force isn't gore, the driving force isn't excessive nudity, it's actually trying something, which is something I can really applaud, especially in this type of horror film where the subgenre is being exhausted to a point where you've seen one, you've seen them all. But I thought Hostile was a little bit different, and that difference comes from the fact that it's very simplistic. Now the simplicity of a woman stuck in the car, you'd think for 80 minutes that's going to get boring, but the movie does go into flashbacks, and I had a problem with the flashbacks, and I also had a positive with the flashbacks, because every time you go back into present day, it gives the situation a little bit more complexity. And so I thought, alright, well the flashbacks are used to give you an insight into this woman's life, what she's actually lost, what she's actually fighting for. And so I thought, alright, well this is a relatable woman. This is not only a film about monsters and trying to keep free of monsters, but it's also a movie about life's adversity. Life's thrown you things that are very hard to deal with, but it's that inner turmoil, it's that inner battle that you can actually have, and basically the thought of never giving up. And so it's an inspirational kind of message that the movie is trying to send, and I thought in some instances it actually worked, and I thought the emotional ending was actually quite hard hitting, and I wasn't really expecting that. So the movie does try avenues that do create something a little bit more complex in a very simplistic story, which is something I can applaud, is because I thought to myself, this is just going to be a movie about a woman stuck in a car, but it actually plays flashbacks and then as I said, gives the present day a little bit more. And so the more and more you know about this woman, the more you can sympathise for her, and this is exactly what the movie wants. But unfortunately, the reason why this movie doesn't work as well is because the flashbacks are a little bit too brief. I never got a chance to naturally soak into her life, to actually know her. I just thought to myself, it's splashing these traumatic events in her life, and we're supposed to connect to her through that trauma. And in some regards, it actually works. It's because, all right, well, no one deserves all the hardships this woman is getting, and you can relate if you've had hardships in your life. But overall, I just didn't think it had enough time to really flesh out these characters. I thought the supporting cast were very hollow, and they weren't really as interesting as the main character. I thought the script didn't allow these actors to play characters that were terribly interesting. And so when you've got flashbacks, I thought that was a little bit of a distraction, because yes, I could see what the director was trying to do, and in some instances it actually worked, but the majority of those flashbacks felt like a distraction, and it makes the continuity of this story a little bit disjointed. And so whenever something really interesting was happening in the present day, it would go back into a flashback. And so because the flashback wasn't as interesting, it didn't really maintain my interest, and it didn't captivate me and keep me intrigued. I just kept waiting for the present day to come back. And because you're just waiting for the present day to come back, you're missing the progression of these characters. But because it's an 80-minute film, it doesn't really have enough time to delve into the characters enough to really connect to them on the emotional level that the director and the film really needs you to. And so that was the biggest problem. And so at the end of the film, as I said, yes, it is emotional, but it would have been a lot more emotional if it actually told its story in a different way, or maybe if those flashbacks were a little bit different and these characters and the script allowed these characters to blossom into something that I could really connect with. And so that's something I really didn't like. And so the simplicity of the story, just a woman stuck in a car, is basically, the flashbacks is what the movie is banking on, but it doesn't quite deliver in that regard. And so that was ultimately the biggest problem I had with Hostile. But if you are a fan of this type of thing, then I would say definitely go out there and see it. As I said, it's a disposable horror film, but it's a horror film that does have a message. It's trying to deliver that message. Basically, as I said, not only is it a monster film, but it's a movie about coping with adversity in life. And so it's a little bit more complex than you would initially think, but unfortunately the complexity to the film isn't really complex enough to really make it work and to really justify those flashbacks existing. So it just feels like a disjointed experience. It's an experience that I would recommend, but you're probably not going to remember it in a few days' time. So overall, for Hostile, going to give this one 3 stars. It's very well made. It has some very memorable moments, but unfortunately the complexity, as I said, just isn't in-depth enough to make it actually work. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you there.